Hello poets, readers, and whoever else, welcome back to the channel. Today we will be talking about all the books that I read in January, which there are 5 of. But before getting into that, does anybody notice anything different? Any guesses? Any takers? I got new glasses. Aren't they really nice? They're a little crooked. I need to get them aligned, but I love how they look. I feel like they make me look so studious and so academic. I feel like an English lit student. Also, one last thing before we get into the video, if you hear anything in the background, please ignore it. As usual, it's construction, which is the bane of my existence. Anyway, grab your drinks, grab your snacks, and let's get on with the video. As I said earlier, I read 5 books in January, 2 of which were read physically, the other 2 were read as ebooks, and the last one was my first audiobook read. Technically listen, but you get what I mean. I know that the reception to the reading number for January is going to be very divided. For some people, it's going to seem like a very small number, and for other people, it's going to seem like a very large number. I reiterate this in almost all of my reading wrap-ups. Reading speed is subjective. Everybody reads at their own pace, and there's no need to feel bad if you read too little compared to other people who maybe read 15 books in a month. I know when I first started booktube, I really put this pressure on myself to crack down on the reading and read as much as I could to chase the number that other people were at. But eventually I realized that setting that type of goal ended up being more of a detriment than a motivation. My camera just died, which is great, 2 minutes into the video, but we continue. As I was saying, setting up that type of goal ended up being more of a detriment than a motivation because yes, I ended up reading a lot of things, but the downside was I could barely retain any of the stories. So, as cliche as this sounds, my one reading goal going to 2024 is really just to prioritize quality over quantity. I don't care how much books I read in a month as long as everything I read I feel good about and I know I actually want to read. So from here on out, I'm going to be promoting the slow reading agenda. Now that we have that out of the way, let's head on to my first read for January, which I read as an ebook, Small Favors by Erin Craig. Erin Craig was one of my favorite author discoveries of last year. I would describe her as the type of author that writes cozy horror fantasies. And maybe you're thinking, oh, cozy and horror don't often go in the same sentence together. But one thing that I think Erin really excels at is creating these worlds that are so well fleshed out without being so complicated like high fantasy books. And she is just so good at crafting atmosphere. Her stories remind me a lot of the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales. Those stories are what a lot of the Disney princess movies are based off of, and those original texts were fairy tales, but they were very much laden with horror. That is the vibe that Miss Erin Craig gives off. Now, Small Favors is a standalone, and it isn't as fantastical as the rest of her books. The book follows Ellery, who is a part of this beekeeping family in the small town of Amity Falls. It's set in a very olden time, but it's never really specified what year it's based in. I feel like I'm too high, but it is very cottagecore. Each family in the town lives in their respective little cottage and they bake pies and wear their little linen pinafores. Very cozy. But the thing about small towns like Amity Falls is that once you do something, everybody and their mother knows about it. People gossip, and that is one of the main sources of conflict in the book. And the gossips go beyond just normal trash-talking gossip. There are rumors about monsters in the woods beyond the town. It's kind of a part of the town's myth, the origin story of Amity Falls. But honestly, even with rumor of monsters going around, people are still more concerned about each other, so that before even the monsters can even get to them, they're already tearing each other down. They're the cause of each other's downfall. While all of this is happening, Miss Ellery is having little rendezvous with a certain... I forgot his name. I always forget characters' names. All I know is that this guy is tall, he is a hunter, he has good humor, he's good looking. What else is there to know? Good looks and height aside, the thing with this guy is that he's mysterious. Ellery basically knows nothing about him. He's a stranger. And with everything going on with the monsters and deaths and the theft, because yes, things do get a little dark in this book, it isn't that smart to be going around trusting a stranger. Is this this guy whose name I forget a bad guy? Well, you have to read the book to find out. I rated this book 3 stars, not bad, but also not the best thing I've ever read, especially compared to The Sisters of the Salt, the other books of Erin's which I've read. But hey, I'm still here recommending it to you. The second book that I read, I also read on my Nook. It is Happy Place by Emily Henry. Now, I know what everybody is thinking. This is a long overdue read. Everybody has read this since it came out last year, and everybody already said that they loved it. Well, guess what? Here I am saying that I read it too, and I love it too. Happy Place is an adult romance book by Emily Henry, who is the author of other popular rom-coms like Beach Read, Book Lovers, People We Meet on Vacation. And like those other books, this has a similar theme of being a story by the beach, being a summer read. However, even if it holds a lot of similarities to Emily Henry's previous work, I would say that it is probably her best book by far. So let's talk about the plot. This time, I do remember the characters. So we have Harriet, who is going on this annual beach vacation with her 2 besties, but to her surprise, her fiance Win is coming along on the trip. You may be thinking, why is this girl surprised that her fiance is there? Why would she not want him there? Well, the thing is, they are not fiancés anymore. They broke their engagement off months ago, but have yet to tell their friends because it was hard to find the right time, which is understandable. It's not an easy thing to break to the people you're close to, but it's not like they can do it on this vacation now either, because the reason why they're there is because 2 of the friends they're with are getting engaged, and this is kind of their engagement party, their engagement send-off. So for an entire week, they have to pretend that they're still together. 7 days in close proximity, 6 nights of being in the same room with a bathroom with no walls. What could possibly go wrong? On the surface, while you're hearing me talk about this, it may seem like just another light, fluffy romance, maybe a little spice in between. But the thing I love about this is, even though, as I said, it's so similar to her other work and it's got so many popular tropes that tend to deteriorate a book's quality, especially romance, the characters have such a solid foundation to them. Usually I don't like books with ensemble casts, like multiple characters, because I can never remember anything about the side characters. I can barely remember the names of the main characters, let alone the side characters. But with this, as I was reading, I was so surprised to see myself getting really attached to each of them. Their friendship is just so well written to me, and it seems like Emily Henry really put a lot of thought into each character's personality, each character's backstory. Whenever a conflict, a problem arose between the friends, not even just the main characters, I immediately understood where each of them was coming from. Like, I could empathize with their side. I could understand their motivations, why they had the shortcomings that they had, and because of that, because I could understand each of them, it just made the book so painful. At one point, I don't remember what scene exactly, but I can tell you that nothing dramatic was happening. Nothing climactic. But I was tearing up! I just felt so much for the characters, especially Win and Harriet. I don't even know what to say. When I'm rendered speechless, you know a book is good. Oh, one last thing I will say about it. Something that I really dislike about a lot of rom-coms that have been coming out is that the basis for the 3rd act conflict is so dumb. Like, usually it's some easily avoidable miscommunication. But with this, with Happy Place, it's an entirely reasonable conflict. What else can I say? Do you need me to say anything more? Without a doubt, this book was a 5-star read. Highly recommend. It's friends to lovers to enemies to lovers again? Question mark? The book I read after that was Poor Things by Alasdair Gray. I read this because I want to watch the movie, which I have yet to get around to, but I'm coming, I'm getting to it. How can I even describe this book? It's very meta. As I was starting this, I was very confused because there's an introduction that talks about how Alasdair Gray just found this book, like the book was already written and he was just the editor. So I was like, oh, is this not fiction at all? Is this some sort of autobiography? So I went into the book with that mindset. But as things went on, I was very terribly confused because the things that go down in this book are not things that can happen in real life. I doubt it. I highly doubt it. So the thing that Alasdair Gray did is he created a story and he inserted himself into this story. Do you get what I mean? A part of the lore to Poor Things is that Alasdair Gray just happened upon it, but in actuality, he is the real author. So if you've been thinking about reading this book and you're really confused about two, that's the best way that I can put it. But anyway, into the actual story, this to me is very similar to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Actually, a lot of people claim this to be a mishmash of a lot of Gothic classics, Frankenstein being one of them. I do agree with that, but even if that is the case, does that really have to be such a bad thing? If an author is going to be inspired by a old, well-loved piece of literature and they reinvent it successfully in a way that is very unique and honestly can never be replicated, I would say that that's not a bad thing. I would say that that's a feat, an achievement, because this is such a unique book and I don't think I will ever read anything like it again. I dub it yassified Frankenstein. We have three main characters. First is Candless, I think is how his name is pronounced. Candless is studying medicine alongside our second character, Godwin Baxter, who is the OG Nepo baby. Godwin is really respected in their community because his father was this trailblazer in medicine who conceptualized these really unorthodox medicinal practices, including practices related to resurrection. So that leads us to our third character, Miss Bella Baxter, who is actually a dead woman who Godwin Baxter brings back to life. Let's put it this way. Godwin Baxter is Dr. Frankenstein because Frankenstein isn't the monster, Frankenstein is the doctor. So Baxter is Dr. Frankenstein, Bella is the monster, and Candless is the guy who falls in love with the monster. As a result of being brought back to life, Bella is by no means normal. She has a very unique perspective on a lot of things. She speaks her mind as she sees fit. She's very in tune with herself and her sexuality. This book actually has a very strange and unique way of going about sexuality. You'll see when you read it. And also, she dresses amazingly, hence why the movie looks like that. As a result of the way she carries herself with confidence and her inherent intelligence, a lot of men are attracted to her and they try to dominate her. That's the thing with this book. On the surface, it may seem very goofy and ridiculous and silly, but a lot of the times while reading this, I found myself picking up on these subtle undertones. I think a part of the message that Alasdair Gray was trying to impart with this book is, despite however much respect and admiration a woman can command, men will always try to make things about them and get that woman to bend to their will. It's a very interesting thing to read about with the kind of treatment that Alasdair gives it. It's kind of subtle, but also not so very subtle, because there's a character named Godwin. Bella literally calls him God. I don't know if I made any sense talking about that book, but I did rate it 4 stars. Would recommend. The next book that I read is Paul by Daisy LaFarge. I find this very similar to another book I read called The Guest by Emma Cline. If you saw my wrap-up, which included that book, you would know I didn't like that book very much, and this is told in a very similar way to The Guest. It has a very vague premise and at the same time no solid goal or ending that it's driving towards, so the whole book is kind of just pointless because it's building up and it's building up only to amount to nothing in the end. If you're curious about the story, this follows Frances, who is an English woman who volunteers to help out at a farm in France, I think, in the south of France, at a farm called Noa Noa. Noa Noa is run by Paul, who is a number of years older than her and is a sleaze. Long story short, Paul and Frances have an affair. I don't like Paul. Paul has no allure to him. And that is a problem with this book. Since from the moment you meet Paul, you know instantly that he doesn't have any redeeming qualities, the whole book becomes a drag. You're just frustrated for Frances, you're frustrated alongside Frances. And by the end, you're left thinking, why do men? Why? It was not enjoyable. I thought I was going to get the farm life action. I wanted it to be cozy at least, but it wasn't even that. 3 stars, but honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I would bump it down to 2. The last thing I read, which I listened to technically as an audiobook, is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I had this on my TBR for the whole of 2023, but I was so intimidated by it. 1, because I'm pretty sure I've only ever seen it come in hardback, not a big fan. 2, it's a thick book. It's a long book. The audiobook had more than 90 chapters, if I recall correctly. What finally got me to listen to it as an audiobook is I was listening to Jennette McCurdy's new podcast called Hard Feelings. In this one episode I was listening to, she was talking about her relationship with her dad, and I recalled, oh wait, I could listen to her memoir as an audiobook. I find it so hard to explain my thoughts on this book because I did not rate it. I do not believe in rating memoirs because I find it strange to be putting a numerical value on somebody's life story. So what I'll be saying from here on out is not really a review, it's just my reaction to the things I listen to. Listen, I was an iCarly girly. I was a Sam and Cat girly. Dare I say, I loved Sam and Cat more than iCarly. So to hear about the behind the scenes of the things that I grew up on, it was very unsettling to me. I'm glad that the audiobook was narrated by Jennette herself, because I feel like if I read it or I listened to it narrated by somebody other than Jennette, I would not have thought that the contents of the book were real. I have a tendency to view them as characters. So to hear Jennette herself narrating the events from her childhood, then to getting into the industry, then getting out of the industry, I literally have no other words to describe it other than insightful, because other than that, it was uncomfortable. Because it is a heavy book. She talks about abuse at the hands of her mother, at the hands of the people in her professional life. She talks about eating disorders, which was, I did not expect her to go into it so explicitly, but honestly, I shouldn't have expected anything less. The way she writes about it helps. She writes about it in a very frank, honestly deadpan way. Would I recommend this book? Yes, however, do proceed with caution. If you're more sensitive to the topics that are in this book, I suggest not listening to it as an audiobook because things get way more vivid with audio. And those are all the books that I read in January. I have no idea what I'm gonna read for February. I'm not pinning myself to a TBR. If you've read any of the books that I talked about, comment your thoughts on them down below. We can chat about it. You can also list some of the books that you read in January. Give us some fresh recommendations, some fresh takes. And that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great week ahead. Goodbye. Especially compared to